it's mind-bending still to me that it's just this monetary innovation. It's just, I never thought it would be such a philosophical rabbit hole in so many different directions. And I don't know, sometimes I catch myself, like the things I'm reading about or thinking about, I'm like, how did Bitcoin lead to all this?
Yeah. Welcome back to the Freedom Footprint Show, the Bitcoin philosophy show with Knut Svanholm and me, Luke the Pseudofin. In today's episode, we're joined by our friend Robert Breedlove, host of the What is Money show, home to some of the best deep dive series into the world of money and Bitcoin, including the Saylor series with Michael Saylor. Our conversation today is inspired by many of the books that have defined our personal experiences and Bitcoin journeys. Maps of Meaning by Jordan Peterson, Human Action by Mises, Economic Science and the Austrian Method by Hoppe, and Lila by Robert Pirsig. We also discuss value and its connection to praxeology. We reflect on communication, language, and argumentation ethics. And finally, we ask Robert for his answer to the age-old question, what is money? Curious? Keep listening. But before we jump in, a quick reminder that the best way to support the show is to send us a boost or stream us some sats using a value for value podcasting app such as Fountain. If you're listening to the show as a podcast, check it out on Fountain. You can earn sats from listening, and you can support us and all your other favorite shows. You can also support us on Geyser or send sats directly to our Lightning address, freedom@geyser.fund. And if you want to exchange your dirty fiat, you can support us on Patreon. All our links are in the description. If you're watching on YouTube, don't forget to like the episode and subscribe to the channel. Even if you're listening as a podcast, head over to our YouTube channel and subscribe to us there. It would be a big help. And finally, we want to thank today's sponsors, Amber app, Wasabi Wallet, Orange Pill app, The Bitcoin Way, and Geyser. All their information is in the description. We'll be talking a bit more about them later. And now, without further ado, here is Robert Breedlove on the Freedom Footprint Show. Rob, welcome to the Freedom Footprint Show. Thanks for joining us.
Hey guys, thanks for having me. Happy to be here.
Yeah, happy to have you on, Rob. I've been on your show 3 times, I think. So it's about time you come to ours.
Yeah, I think so. I'm overdue.
So we met briefly in Riga. We were both busy. You a bit busier than us, as usual. And you did a bunch of interviews there. I mean, you work like a Terminator and look like one as well for that. I mean, you've been doing a ton of interviews. And I'm really impressed by that work ethic of yours. Like it's always on, it seems.
Thank you. Well, I mean, you know how the podcasting thing is. Like when you're doing it, it's very intense. Especially when you're at events and everyone's there, you get a lot of juice for the squeeze by just really getting all the speakers or whoever's attending the event together and knocking out a bunch of interviews. But then you get to, turn down hopefully for a few days after that. So it seems like it's kind of like sprint and then rest type of work frequency.
Yeah, it's a good lifestyle.
Yeah, exactly.
So who did you interview in Riga?
Yeah, we had Adam back. Talked a little bit about the block size wars with him, in addition to some other things they've been doing over at Blockstream. Talked to Dylan LeClaire. Spoke with I don't want to mispronounce his name now. The last Austrian economist in Austria.
Rahim Tagesadigan.
Rahim, thank you. Had a good lengthy conversation with him and a few others. So yeah, it was a good time. And then it looks like, this isn't final yet, but it looks like I'll try to go to Lugano.
Oh, excellent. We're coming
October.
to Lugano too.
Yeah, so we'll try to do the same thing there, get some people together, have some interviews. And then also, I'll be at Jordan Peterson's event at the end of October, beginning of November in London. And so I'll be interviewing some of the speakers at that event there. So that'll be obviously that's not a Bitcoin event, but definitely a lot of people in the, let's say, freedom-focused universe. Hopefully having them on for some in-person interviews as well. So I'm super excited for all that.
You gave me the perfect segue, Rob.
Yes.
Okay.
So I'll just give you like a quick little bit of background, but basically you and the Saylor series, you were my orange pill. Absolutely. And
nice.
So, first personal thank you for that. But the way I found you was when you went on Lex Fridman, and I'd been watching kind of all of his crypto and Bitcoin related people at the time, but yours was, well, unique. And the thing that I latched onto was somewhere in the middle there. You mentioned Jordan Peterson, and you called Maps of Meaning one of your most meaningful books, like the books you would recommend the most. I believe it was Human Action and Maps of Meaning were the two you mentioned there. And well, basically, I've been a Peterson guy for a long time now. Helped me through my younger adulthood, so to say. I'm still young, but getting there. But the main thing, I guess, that I wanted to ask or to talk to you a little bit about was, so I'm rereading Maps of Me again, and it just kind of, it's all fantastic stuff. But can you tell a little bit about what you got out of that book, what Maps of Meaning means to you?
Ooh, yeah. The books that I mentioned on the Lex Fridman podcast were Maps of Meaning, Human Action, and then Robert Pirsig's book, Lila. And I think reading those three books together is a good way to dematerialize your worldview, in the sense that you'll move away from being a materialist into someone that understands the world just through a different framework, right? A framework of value, a framework of praxeology in the case of human action, and maybe even a different metaphysical framework when you use something like Lila, that the book that really posits that value is the fundamental ground stuff of reality in a way. So I just thought those three books are very interesting to read together, which I just happened to do at that time. But Maps of Meaning specifically, I think Peterson, I mean, he's drawing very heavily on like Carl Jung and others, but he's basically putting forth a worldview that's non-materialist, right? Has more to do with value, has more to do with, what you value actually determines what, not only how you see the world, but what you actually see in the world. One of the experiments he often likes to cite is the selective attention experiment, where there's people are charged with the task of counting the number of basketball passes between these two teams on a video. And when they do that, they fail to see the 6-foot man in a gorilla costume come into the middle of the screen and wave his arms around for a few seconds and walk off screen, because they're so focused on the task of actually counting the number of passes. So the point being that when they value achieving the objective of counting the number of passes, that you actually fail to see 6-foot gorillas walking into the middle of your frame. And so valuation, or the process of valuation, is actually determining what you see in the world, not just how you see the world. And, the book Maps of Meaning, I don't know that I'd recommend it to everyone. It's very dense. I think Peterson said he spent 15 years and 3 hours a day for 15 years writing it. Something just an absurd amount of work went into it. The sentences are very dense, but he goes down a lot of the psychological rabbit holes that Jungian psychology gets into. I really got, one of the most fascinating parts of that book for me was towards the end, when he's talking about alchemy, and just the nature of what alchemy was said to be. It was said to be a process that paralleled the passion of Christ. It was the pursuit of the lapis philosophorum, which was the philosopher's stone, which was said to be the incorruptible substance that would serve as an antidote for tyranny in the world. And there were just so many parallels with Bitcoin there. Also, by interacting with the philosopher's stone, it actually makes you better. And so we often talk about Bitcoiners going down the Bitcoin rabbit hole and experiencing personal transformations. Maybe I've drank too much of the orange Kool-Aid, but I definitely saw a lot of parallels between Peterson's discussion of alchemy and the philosopher's stone to Bitcoin overall. And then, where I think JBP, or I guess, obviously saying Maps of Meaning, you could have also called the book Maps of Value in a way. And there's a lot of talk about meaning and a lot of talk about value, but that it sort of doesn't get into, he doesn't have Mises in his worldview, right? He doesn't have praxeology, he doesn't have human action. So it's like he fails to see this deep connection, perhaps even you might even say value and action are like the same thing, right? All human action is an expression of value. I'm not completely convinced it's just human, though. Like, I think purpose might be something that exists beyond just the human domain. Obviously, that's more of a metaphysical debate. But I think that in JVP's work, it keeps the matter of value rather abstract, and that he doesn't ground it out in the practical realities of actual human action. And I think that's where you get a lot of value by plugging in, reading the book Human Action and Mises. And then again, with Lila, you get this sort of metaphysical grounding in addition to those two books that really just sort of rounds out the counterpoint to the materialist worldview, you might say.
Yeah, the density of Maps of Meaning is it's quite something. I've appreciated his lecture series on that topic, which kind of distilled that and made it a little bit more accessible. But when he came out with 12 Rules for Life, I'd actually been hoping for like a Maps of Meaning light instead, and sort of the Rules for Life series is that, but it's of course it's couched in this framing that's supposed to make it ultra accessible, and yeah, that's had maybe mixed success, I would say. But yeah, I really like your point, I guess, about that Maps of Value could be an alternate title, and certainly agree that his lack of the praxeological point is glaringly obvious when you've been looking at that side of things. But yeah, that was kind of my comments there. But Knut, any on that?
Curious, when did you last speak to Jordan?
I mean, we've traded emails about the event, so just over the past several months. But spoken to him, actually spoken to him, I haven't spoken to him since we did our thing in Miami.
Okay, so do you think he's properly orange pill at this point? We see some hints back and forth, but then once in a while he says something sort of counter to the Bitcoin ethos in terms of, internet anonymity and stuff like that. He doesn't really seem to grasp the importance of privacy, or just have a different outlook than on that topic than most Bitcoiners. So where do you think he is in his rabbit hole journey?
Well, I would definitely say he is not properly orange pilled yet. As we all know, that takes whatever X hundred hours to get to that point, somewhere between 1 and a few hundred hours, I guess, depending on who you are, what approach you take, etc. I doubt he's spent that much time at all. Like, it seems like he paid attention to Bitcoin in the bull market, and then when bull market ceased, he kind of stopped paying attention. He still tweets things out though, like, can Bitcoin fix this? He'll be tweeting out some.
Yeah, this was last week, right?
Yeah, something. Australia moving people to a cashless society. I think they were just turning off physical cash, and he's saying, can Bitcoin fix this? And we're like, of course. That's a counterparty basically rug pulling you effectively. And so Bitcoin's money without a counterparty. So yeah, Bitcoin does fix that. No one's going to turn off Bitcoin on you, right? Whereas they can basically turn off physical cash. So his curiosity is there. Where is he at on his journey? I'm not entirely sure, but he will be the first to admit to you that he doesn't have a strong understanding of economics in general. Even the way he describes money, he describes money as trust. And again, I think you get very muddy with the language here, because I would lean more on Nick Szabo's perspective of money being the trust minimized asset, right? The thing that I can use in exchange with the least need to trust anyone, right? Least counterparty risk. And so, but again, the trust is an ambivalent term, right? Because it's like, okay, there's the least need for interpersonal trust, but it's the same thing as saying you have trust in the integrity or credibility of the monetary properties associated with the money. It's like saying, okay, when I walk across a bridge, am I trusting an individual individuals to keep the bridge intact, or am I trusting principles of civil engineering that were properly applied? So it's interpersonal versus impersonal trust. And so when he just says money is trust, I think it's very much ambivalent and not that useful. So there's that. And then again, I would love to hear him really try to expand upon the question, what is value? Because I don't know what value is other than what is expressed in human action. Like, what else is value other than what is expressed in human action? And so for all of his focus on meaning and value, I don't think, I would like to hear what grounding definition he has for that. Because if you really come to understand that, then, a lot of the arguments he's putting forth would just plug straight into praxeology, and then he would go down the Mises rabbit hole, and then presumably he would get thoroughly orange pilled in the process. So
would we love to see that?
Yeah, we would love to see that. But who knows? He's an older guy. I don't know how many more rabbit holes he's got left to go down.
So on that note, what is your answer, your personal answer to the question, what is money?
I wish I had only one for you. The thing, okay, I'll say this first, that the most interesting thing for me on this almost 3-year journey now doing the podcast, the What is Money show, asking this question to, I don't know how many, we've had 360 something episodes, definitely over 100 guests. A lot of the episodes are long form series, so we have the same guest over and over, but I'd say we've got to be over 100 guests. And the fact that there are so many different answers to that question that make sense in certain contexts, it's like asking one of these other profound questions, like, what is truth? What is justice? What is beauty? What is love? You would think that these very essential terms that we use would have very clear definitions that might be your intuitive position. It's like, well, of course we should know what truth is. It's like one of the most important things in the world, where we talk about it all the time. But then when you actually get into it and you try to define truth, you see that philosophers have been debating it for many, many centuries, and it continues to be a debate. And there's different forms of truth, right? There's pragmatic truths and transcendental truth, et cetera, et cetera. So money, for some reason, is one of those terms, apparently, one of these very potent, essential terms. It's an essential tool, obviously. Every trading society has money or some form of money. You could also say that money is more of an attribute, right, than necessarily a thing.
Yeah, an adjective is what we said in the last talk we had.
An adjective, right? Because every asset that is traded in a marketplace has some degree of moneyness, which is commensurate with its liquidity. And the thing that has the most moneyness is the thing we call money, basically. So the very interesting realization that I've had or am having still is how indispensable, let's say insufficient language is, first of all, for describing this complex, fluid world continuum that we all inhabit. We're using these little discrete data packets called words and trying to map it onto this fluid domain we call reality. So it's insufficient, yet it's also indispensable, and that it is the best tool we have for, thinking, communicating, rationalizing, reflecting, calculating, etc. So that's been my big takeaway, I guess, from doing the show. Not takeaway. It's nothing to take away. It's something I'm still thinking about. It's like, how do you describe the nature of language itself? And it's taken me into a lot of rabbit holes. Now, to answer your question a little more directly, I still think the most useful conception of money is as a storehouse or reservoir of time. You might say human time, you might say lifetime. And it's not just money, though. It's really capital. All right, capital is the result of humans spending time, effort, and energy to create things that amplify the productivity of others or allow future consumption for themselves or other people. So all capital is kind of like a stored form of human time. But then money is just the form of capital that is most liquid, most tradable. And so it becomes a very close reflection of time. And you see that in just people's day-to-day use of money, right? And that you go to work, you trade time for money, and then you take that money back into the marketplace and you trade that money for the time of others. So people will serve you at the restaurant or building you a house or making you shoes or whatever the thing is. So I think there's a lot of intuitive value in framing it as time. And then I think it's also very useful for explicating the malevolent nature of central banking. Where you're like, okay, if there's a currency counterfeiting monopoly, everyone's forced to use this stuff. They're stealing purchasing power through, arbitrarily inflating the money supply. Well, what does that equate to if money is time? Okay, it's systematic time theft, right? People are having their time stolen systematically with every dollar printed. So, I guess that is still the answer that I lean on the most. I also think, obviously Saylor bringing this whole perspective of money as energy to the table is a big deal, because you could equally argue money is time, money is energy, or as we've often said too, money is power, right? And power is a product of time and energy, right? I think power is the capacity to move energy over time, right? Or perform work over time, something like that in a physics sense. So again, you ask this question, what is money? And you end up in very fundamental domains like physics and, time. Like, what is time? Time's probably the most mysterious thing in the universe. So it's maybe not useful from like a very practical standpoint to say money is time, but I think it's very useful from a philosophical standpoint and giving people somewhat of an intuitive explanatory framework to deal with this very abstract, mysterious notion.
All right. So about communication and language in general, there's some points I have there. Like if we want to apply the non-aggression principle, and if we want to not use violence in any shape or form or threats thereof, then in my mind, at least, communication is the only tool we have left. Like it's not only, a tool, it's the tool. There are no other tools in the toolbox once you do not allow yourself to use force anymore. So that's the only thing we have. So we need clear definitions of words are crucial to that. And that's why one of the things I like so much about Mises in particular, that he's very, very careful with words and the definition of them. And I do agree that truth is a very hard word to define, but the words true and false, in a sense, are the binary of any language, because we define everything else by having this binary base layer of language, which is that is true and that is false. I mean, is truth hard to define? Yes, that is true. You can always boil down communication to these yin yang, ones and zeros, true and false. So the word true is, in a sense, easier to define than the word truth, and even easier than the word truthfulness, which is very hard to define, because that implies some form of subjectivity. But what do you say to that? What are your thoughts?
So there's a strange thing here. Okay, first of all, to the importance of, and maybe this is why money is so hard to define as well, but I would say words, right? Language. This is a form. Words are a media of exchange, just like money is Mises would say money is a universal medium of exchange. Well, I would say so are words, right? We're just using them to exchange as a medium to exchange human conceptions or ideas, whereas money we're using as a medium of exchange for actual goods and services, capital, right? The results of human action, let's say. So maybe it's because of these intermediary devices. They're a little bit hard to pin down and define. I do agree with you that absent rationality, all that really remains is raw power, right? It's might is right. If you can't have precise definitions that both people have consensus on, which is obviously very important, your notion of the number 7 needs to match my notion of the number 7 for us to have rational communication about mathematics, for instance, which is another way of saying there has to be social consensus on each term. If you don't have that, right, if you have a lack of consensus or no language at all, no rationality, no rational argumentation, then what's left, right? It's just pure animality. Just who can beat up who.
Well, this boils back to Hoppe's argumentation ethics, which I find so insanely fascinating because, like, even if we don't have consensus on what the number 7 means, we can allow ourselves to agree to disagree. And like, there's where conversation ends. But as long as there's no, property to fight over, we can still agree to disagree.
Well, you can agree to disagree to the extent that rational communication is possible between you. That's the point.
Exactly. Yeah, totally agree. And what's so fascinating here about Bitcoin is that it's nothing but an agreement to disagree. Like, that is what Bitcoiners do. We agree to disagree, and because we know that it's harder to, it's more expensive to try to cheat the system than to just follow the rules. And also, like, I find it so insanely fascinating that Bitcoin has sort of teared down that wall between money and language. It is the same thing now. It is just communication. Like, we provably so, we can exchange goods and services for a number, which we can hold in our heads. And we don't need anything but that. It's just communication. And all the computers involved are just an extension of our mind, and all of this mumbo jumbo about all the time, like how you are your Bitcoin. Like, since they are information, there's nothing separating yourself from your Bitcoin, really. It's just an extension of your mind. It lives within you. And I think that is what makes it so obvious that it's communication. And if money is just communication, well, that changes everything. Like, so this whole notion that we're being robbed by inflation, is that really involuntary, or did we put ourselves in that situation? Did humanity like choose to trust these things, and was that a bad choice? Like, how enforced were government issued currencies really, and how much did we just fall for it, like, en masse?
And back to the importance of precise definitions here, I would say that, yeah, holding an inflationary currency or a fiat currency where you can have your purchasing power stolen via inflation is voluntary. However, it is not consensual. And Mr. Kinsella, I can thank him for taking me to task on this. I used to always talk about voluntary exchange, how important it is. He's like, well, actually, the definition of like, he used the example of the mugger, right? When you get mugged in the back alley, someone puts a gun to you and says, give me your wallet. Well, you voluntarily hand the mugger your wallet, right? You control your arm and decide, the cost of me saying no to this guy is higher than the benefit of me giving up my wallet. So I'm going to hand him my wallet voluntarily. However, you're doing it under the threat of violence or coercion. So you're not surrendering your wallet consensually, although you are doing it voluntarily. An example of something that's involuntary would be a seizure or a heart attack, right? Something that you can't control. Your biology just controls you basically in that situation. So when I look at central banking, you have a legal monopoly that preserves the currency counterfeiting or arrogates the currency counterfeiting privilege to one group of shareholders and allows them to externalize that onto everyone else, right? The guns are pointed out, as I always like to say. They're protecting the central bank currency counterfeiting monopoly, but the guns are pointed out such that everyone else is effectively forced to use it. Now, again, you're not forced, like, again, it's still voluntary. We could all just choose to have used physical gold all this time and said, no, we're never going to use your paper money. But obviously, as a means of practicality, that doesn't work. It's hard to buy coffee with gold, right? It's hard to move gold around safely. There's all these problems with using gold for day-to-day transactions in a way that's not centrally custodied. So,
or any other commodity for that matter.
Yes, exactly. So I answer the question. It's like, yes, holding an inflationary currency is voluntary. You're doing it voluntarily. You could sell all your dollars and buy physical gold and put it in your backyard. Now with Bitcoin, it's even easier, right? You can just hold Bitcoin. So every time you do choose to trade something for dollars or hold dollars in an account, you're doing that voluntarily, but your purchasing power nonetheless is being stolen from you non-consensually. And that you're participating, even though you've voluntarily put yourself into this legal monopoly, you're not voting for the counterfeiting of currency, right? You're not supporting it. You're not approving it. You're not really, I guess you could argue you're opting into it if you have the right level of understanding, but most people clearly don't. And that level of general level of understanding is intentionally kept low. I always like to talk about, I have a master's degree in accounting and finance, right? You would think I would know something from my mainstream education about central banking, about the nature of money, something, right? It's literally this the language of business. Everything we learn is about how money moves in and out of businesses, how taxation works. My focus was in taxation, yet there was not one single line of education given to me about Austrian economics, the nature of money, no talk about central banking, no talk about the trade-offs and opportunity costs that governments and bureaucracies and central banks face. They're just treated as these omnipotent organizations inside of the textbooks, right? The government just puts new currency into circulation and takes new currency out of circulation. There's a black box there that the education system doesn't go into. So it's pretty clear that the existing paradigm seeks to protect itself intellectually by not going into the nature of money, where it comes from, Austrian economics, etc. So yes, it is voluntary but not consensual.
Yeah, funny you should give that answer, because I love the Kinsella series you did, the series you did with Stefan Kinsella.
Thank you.
And it was influenced why I nowadays call myself a consensualist rather than a voluntarist.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think I went from libertarian leaning to anarcho-capitalist, which is sort of too aggressive, and then voluntarist, and now consensualist, because I think consensualist frames it better. Like I'd like as many interactions between human beings to be consensual as possible. That should be the guiding principle for your opinion on everything else. Like, if you have that,
it's like the apex of human rationality, right? It's like, of course, you want to respect that we're all rational beings and that we're all capable of deciding for ourselves. So we don't need to be coerced into doing things. And I think this notion is pretty obvious if you look at the dating market, right? Now, there have been arranged marriages. There still are arranged marriages. There still is some degree of pressure, perhaps in some cultures, to put people into certain marital arrangements. But in general, I think the moral intuitions in the West are that we should all be free to choose our own partner, right? Our partners would date whoever we want, marry whoever we want, if we want to get married. It would be pretty hard to sell the idea of having a non-consensual dating market, right? Where someone gets to coerce you into being their boyfriend or girlfriend. And, another way that I've framed this, and it's not always very popular, but the difference between a job and slavery is consent, right? You can quit the job, you can say no, and you can go get another job. If you're a physical slave in the traditional sense, well, you can't. There's no opt out, right? You are enslaved against your consent. the difference between a financial transaction and taxation or theft is consent. If I can say no to the transaction and take my business elsewhere, as can you, then it's good. We're all consensual. But if I refuse the transaction and there's a threat of coercion, well, then that's the same situation I'm in with the mugger in the alley, right? I don't want to give you my wallet for free. It's like, okay, well, then I'll shoot you, right? So that's obviously theft, right? That's not a transaction. We wouldn't call it a transaction taking place in the alley. We would call that getting mugged or getting robbed. And in terms of the dating market, the difference between sex and rape is consent, right? Both parties need to be willing, able, and consenting to have a normal sexual engagement between two willing adults. If that's absent on either side, right? If there's either party that wants to say no, but they're forced into it, well, then we would call that rape. So, consent is very, very, very important. And I think we should strive to universalize it. I mean, it's the only way, it's the only rational way to deal with the reality that we are all rational beings and capable of choosing for ourselves.
Yeah, this once again reminds me of Hoppe's argumentation ethics, which basically say that if you argue with someone, you have to respect their property rights, because property rights are derived from the fact that you own your own faculties. If you don't accept that you're using your tongue and your vocal cords and your lungs and so on to talk to, so that you're in possession of them and you own them. If you don't respect that in the other person, so if you argue about something, the ownership of something, or who's the rightful owner of something, and the conclusion, and you discard the conclusion and then choose to take instead. So like if you argue about taxes with a taxman, for instance, and the taxman agrees with you about everything you say, but then still chooses to force you to pay the taxes, that's when the argument turns into mockery. Like, it's not an argument anymore. He's just a bully. So it's not the argument ceases to be argumentation ceases to be argumentation once property rights are violated in any way, shape, or form. And on this notion, like the thing you said about consent, like I love another series of yours that I highly recommend is the Hillebrand series with our friend Max Hillebrand, where you talk about the books, the Rothbard book, The Ethics of Liberty, which is one of my favorite Austrian economics books. That one, and the Hoppe's, which is another recommendation from Max, by the way, the Economic Science and the Austrian Method, I think is the title. It's not a very clickbaity title, but it's a great, very dense book. And those two books, I think they frame this so well, and just about the things you've been talking about here about consent and how important it is.
I actually have some stuff to say about that book. That's a really, really, really good book. Hoppe's got a lot of good stuff. Very unsexy title, as you said, Economic Science and the Austrian Method, ESAM for short. Very short book, but like most of Hoppe's writing, very dense, very informative. I was blown away, actually, that one of the points that I took away from that book was that he's saying that like the mind matter split, right? The Cartesian split that we all sort of inherited when Descartes said, I think, therefore I am, as if there's two fundamental realities, right? There's the subjective thinking mind, and then there is the objective world. Hoppe makes this point that perhaps this distinction between mind and matter, or between subject and object, is a subcategory of human action, because it is only through human action where mind and matter come together, right? It's almost like we're using this distinction as like an artificial distinction that's useful in many ways, right? We could say all valuation is subjective, for instance. It's a matter of the mind rather than a matter of the world. But somehow action is like above that even. Action is the thing that allows subject and object duality to even come into existence, where many of us, I think, in the Western materialist worldview, take subject-object reality to be the most fundamental thing there is, right? That there is an actual split between mind and matter. Whereas in fact, it seems to be most things are continuous, right? I don't know that there's an actual out there discrete split between mind and matter. So that blew my mind. Again, just the primacy of human action and how it's everywhere. And I think that, again, ties nicely back into that book, Lila, where Pirsig's saying it almost in a different way, that value is the ground stuff of reality. There's no substance, like value is the substance. And it's something about...
Actually, would you mind giving us a TLDR on that book for anyone who's not familiar with it?
TLDR on Lila. Yeah, I would mind, because I don't know that that's actually possible. Let me just say, so he's the author of Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, which was the most popular or best-selling philosophy book in the West, I think in the 20th century, something like that. One of the best, maybe not the best. Many people have read that one. Many people have heard of it if they haven't read it. Almost no one's heard of or read the book he wrote 15 years later, which is Lila, which is much better. And Pirsig, man, he's just like a next level genius. He blends fiction. So there's like a fictional story blended with some elements of autobiography. He's actually writing about himself and his life and some of his experiences blended into this fictional narrative. And then there's a non-fictional philosophical exploration about the nature of metaphysics and value and quality. He distinguishes between dynamic and static value, etc. The TLDR, I don't have a TLDR. He just gets into like all the things we're talking about. We're talking about the nature of value, the continuity between, inorganic and organic reality. Let's say he gives different levels of value. He has the inorganic layer, biological, social, and intellectual. There's different patterns of value that basically interact. He describes how these layers interact sort of like a software system. And it gives rise to basically a whole metaphysical framework that he puts forth, that stuff and substance is not real. Value and morality is. So it's a very strong argument for the fundamental nature of I guess you could say human action or value itself. And again, the ESAM book just sort of dovetails nicely with that one, where it's like making the argument that human action has this primacy that most people don't understand. And again, if all action is an expression of value, then we're kind of dancing around the same topic here, right? When you hear many people invoke the word value, this is again why I was hearkening to Peterson earlier. Like, I'd love to hear his like deep definition. I don't see how you escape human action. Like, to act is to value, right? To express one's value. And so, yeah, I guess that's what I would say about ESAM in general. And then just to circle back to something you said earlier, Knut, about the tax man, when you argue with someone, which was Hoppe's point, I think, you're implicitly acknowledging the reality of individual self-ownership, right? You are using your faculties to try and put forth a point. You're listening to another person employ their faculties to put forth their counterpoint. And the only way that process can unfold is if indeed you both own yourself, right? Like I own my faculties and I'm generating the points that I'm putting forth. You're assimilating that information, presumably, and generating your own counterpoint and putting those things forth. The only way we can do that is through this implicit acknowledgement of individuals owning themselves, individual self-ownership. And once the tax man says, okay, enough with that, even if he agrees with you, right? Yes, we agree, blah, 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 but still pay me, right? Pay the tax. You're actually disacknowledging, if that's even a word, individual self-ownership. Because all of a sudden you're saying, well, that's all good. You own yourself. We had this argument. We reached a conclusion, but give me your stuff or I'm going to hurt you. Right. So you're actually contradicting what argumentation confirms, right? You're disconfirming what argumentation confirms. Argumentation confirming that individuals own themselves. When you resort to coercion and violence, you're disconfirming that reality. And when you do that, I mean, you unwind the entire process of human civilization, rational discourse, et cetera, et cetera. Because if people don't own themselves and it's just a free-for-all, then we're back to might is right? Who's got the biggest stick? Who can coerce who the hardest? I think in Atlas Shrugged, there's a line. She said, when force becomes the standard by which men interact, then the pickpocket loses out to the tyrant or the murderer, something like that. So the race becomes who is the most violent, right? Who can coerce and commit as much violence as possible. Well, guess what that happens? Guess what that does to the world, guys? When you commence that race, civilizations vanish in a spread of slaughter and ruin, I think, as she wrote as well. So it's hard to overstate how important rational discourse and respect for universal respect for individual life, liberty, and property is to the human enterprise.
Okay, we have some big news. We have a new lead sponsor, Amber App. They're the #1 exchange in the Southern Hemisphere. They're rated for the best customer service around, and their global launch is coming. But the reason we're partnering with Amber App is because of the people. If you haven't listened to our episode with Izzy, CEO of Amber App, you really should go check it out. You'll see why it made perfect sense to partner with Izzy and Amber App. That's all I'll say for now. You really have to check it out for yourself. They have loads of great features coming that we're excited to share with you when the time comes. But for now, just check out the episode, check out their website, amber.app. You can see for yourself why we're thrilled to bring Amber App on as our lead sponsor and partner. So go check it out. Next up, Wasabi Wallet, the privacy by default, open source, non-custodial Bitcoin wallet with CoinJoin built in. It's the easy to use, comprehensive, affordable way to make your coins private. And the best part is they've been making huge improvements to the app. They're really focusing on the user experience, adding advanced features for power users. They just keep getting better. You send your coins to your Wasabi wallet and they get combined with loads of other coins using the Wabi-Sabi protocol, so they're private on the other end. Your tracks are covered, so you can work on expanding your freedom footprint without worrying about your privacy. So check out wasabiwallet.io and download Wasabi today.
Yeah, and on that note, I mean, what happens is that when you have this class of people that are able to coerce and use force to extract stuff from other people, that's why you get clown world, because the race becomes to look good to these people so that they will pay you or they will hurt you less. And so I think what Bitcoin did was just turn that upside down and give property rights back to the people. So in that sense, I think Bitcoin is one divided by clown world. It's the literal inverse of clown world incentives. And I find that that's my next equation. I'll need to put that somewhere. Bitcoin is one divided by clown world. So on back to Rothbard and Hoppe, because I love them so much, and also Ayn Rand. But congrats on that beautiful little video clip you did from that section about money in the book. By the way, it was beautiful.
Oh, I take no credit for that. My editor is a genius. I just read the text and send it to him, and he makes it beautiful.
Okay. Anyway, where was I going with this? Yeah, about ownership versus possession, because I think this is on the same line of argumentation and mockery. It's adjacent. Like ownership is like a legal relationship with a thing, right? Because you can own a thing, but someone else may possess it, the gold that is legally belongs to African countries in some central banks in the West, but the West refuses to give it back or whatever. But Bitcoin, what is owning a Bitcoin? Can you even own a Bitcoin? Can you possess it? Or is it just keeping a secret? Are we on an even deeper level of ownership than possession? Is this even even more robust? Like, what's your thoughts on that? Because that's something that's been, tickling my mind for a long time now.
Yeah, it's very, very mysterious. I think it was you, someone that coined the whole phrase, right? Like with Bitcoin, owning and is now knowing and owning.
Yeah.
The same
knowing
thing.
is owning.
Yeah.
Yep.
But again, I would credit Kinsella here. I used to think, oh yeah, that totally makes sense. But he's like, well, actually, you've got to decompose this terminology a little bit, because ownership is actually a legally enforceable claim on an asset, right? On a scarce asset, such that you can exclude others from its use. You could say ownership is like recourse to the legal apparatus of coercion to resolve a dispute, right? If someone steals your car, well, you might not be in possession of your car after they steal it, but you still own it, right? You have the title or whatever it may be. And so you can bring to bear force, right? Legally to get it back, right? They can pull the guy over and arrest him and take the car and give it back to you. And that's fundamentally different from possession, which in a strict sense is just physical custody, effectively. And so Bitcoin, what can you own Bitcoin? I guess it sort of has a foot in both worlds in a way, because a judge could make a judgment, right? And say, hey, this Bitcoin that's in possession of Robert belongs to Knut, right? Knut is the rightful owner of this Bitcoin. But if I'm in possession of the keys, it's hard to enforce that, right? I can also have all this plausible deniability, like, oh, sorry, judge, had the boating accident, right? It's all gone now. So I guess in a strict legal sense, you can own Bitcoin, and that a legal apparatus can tell you like who is the rightful owner of a specific private key. I'm not saying that this is being done, but it can be done, I guess. But to possess Bitcoin is something entirely different, right? To actually have the private key. And even then, you don't physically custody a piece of material reality, right? You've got an alphanumeric string. You've just got information, right? Which, as you're saying, is like something like keeping a secret. And yeah, it's a great point. It's not, if possession meant physical custody, then you never really physically custody Bitcoin. You're just guarding that secret, which allows you to unlock the ability to spend from that UTXO set, right? So it's different somehow. And I guess in that sense, it's kind of like just guarding a secret. I guess that's the best way to put it. And so, no, can you own it? Yes, technically, but the ownership is largely unenforceable, I think, in most cases. Can you possess it? Not really, because you can't physically possess the thing. It's just informational. So what can you do with it? You can keep your private key guarded and secret and use it to the extent that you can do that.
Yeah, because I think we need a whole plethora of new laws around this, or no laws at all, because like the current legal framework in different countries have different approaches to it, and they try to enforce like old world stuff onto this new thing. Mm-hmm. But even proving that someone is in possession of a Bitcoin is impossible, because how do you prove that someone knows something?
That's right.
You can't, and like it's kind of vulgar that they with these chain anal companies that try to do that, and they try to set legal precedents for this stuff. When you not only can you not prove that someone is in possession of it, you cannot prove that someone else isn't. Like you can guess the key. I mean, the chances of you guessing the right key are astronomically small, and that's why we trust this thing to the extent that we do. But at the end of the day, there's no real way to prove that someone has knowledge about something. And it's only when you put this like on a computer, on a hardware wallet, or on a steel plate, then you turn it into a physical thing, because then the letters are engraved in that thing, and then it becomes physical. But it doesn't have to be physical. And I find this so insanely fascinating, because like you can think of all sorts of situations where this becomes problematic. Like if you fly with your 12 words, for instance, and you get stopped in the security check, what's stopping the security officer from just, copying those words? Or which is a whole new, there's a whole slew of new problems there that come with this notion of keeping a secret and not keeping a secret. And the thing it does, it invokes responsibility in people, because once you dive down in this rabbit hole, you realize that you have to keep the secret in like you have to figure out for yourself what the best way for you of keeping the secret is, because there's no universal answer to how to keep a secret. And so there's so much to unpack there, because now I'm ranting on here, I know, but if it's just keeping a secret, they're a part of you, and that's so. And how big a part of you is up to you, because it's opt-in. So you can have 100% of your wealth in Bitcoin, or you can have 1%. But how much you have in Bitcoin in comparison to how much you live in the clown world, you have a tool now where you can choose to opt out to a specific percentage of your being. Like this, 60% of me can never be coerced into anything. Like I can do that literally. I can say, well, okay, I can put up with some coercion to have a police force and a fire brigade and whatnot. But I think I'm fine with just paying 15% taxes. I'll opt out of the rest, thank you. And you can just do that. And that's true for everyone in the world. And I find it so insanely fascinating. And how the question becomes, how far off into the future? But I mean, how long will it take before everyone realizes that this is already true?
Well, that's a great question. I think always answering questions about timing is very important. I'm sorry, very difficult. Obviously very important, but very, very difficult to say when something is going to happen.
Yeah, it's a stupid question. I know. I mean,
that's not stupid. It's very important, right? It's like, well, when would be very useful to know, but I think it's equally incredibly difficult to answer that question. So a couple things just to like things you said there, right? It's astronomically difficult to guess someone's private key. Correct me if I'm wrong here, but I think the right term might even be it's like beyond astronomically small, the chances of actually guessing someone's private key. It's like the chances are like if you made a guess every second, you would need longer than the life of the universe, right? To guess someone's private key. So it's actually
on average
astronomically small. So infinitesimal that we obviously trust it as if it's not even possible effectively to guess someone's private key. And then the other like aspect I would introduce is it sounds like, especially people that don't understand Bitcoin, like, oh my God, that's a lot of responsibility. That's scary. I'm going to carry this secret in my head. And like, what if I get knocked out, or if I get amnesia, or someone tortures me to get the key, all of these things. It's not a binary, right? It's not you either trust someone else with your private key or you hold your private key between your ears. There's all these other possible custody schemas. I think multi-key or multi-sig is obviously very important here. You can take that secret, chop it into pieces, into mini secrets, if you will, and distribute that among different people inside of your circle of trust. And then you need a certain quorum of those mini secrets to unlock spending ability, right? A 2 of 3, 3 of 5, et cetera. So there's ways to like de-risk it, even ratcheting down the responsibility to some degree, that you'd still have a lot of responsibility to keep up with 1 of 5, but if you lose it, it's not the end of the world. Whereas if it's a 1 of 1, well, it is the end of that world, at least if you lose your private key. And also that gives you some resistance against just the whole, against coercion, right? Against $5 wrenches or the guy stopping you in the airport, trying to copy your seed phrase or whatever. You're not subject to a single point of failure. So I always think that's a very important point when we talk about these topics, because people get scared when they hear, what do you mean? I have to memorize my whole life's worth, and if I forget or mess up, that it's over. And so that's important.
Yeah, you can have all sorts of solutions at the same time. You can have a multi-sig, you can have a single-sig hardware wallet and a custodial phone wallet for different solutions for different purposes, right? So, and I think that we need to educate people more about that aspect of it, that Bitcoin can be extremely simple to use, but that then they're somewhat at risk, and they can be hard to set up a really theft proof solution. But on the other hand, they will probably be there forever.
Yeah, so it's like, you put a few dollars in your pocket to go out at night, that might be your equivalent to your hot wallet, right? You might have a few more, if you're traveling, you might have a few more dollars hidden inside your suitcase somewhere, right? It's kind of like your little account you'll draw from as you're traveling. You'll swap US dollars for local currency or whatever it may be. That's kind of like maybe like a non-custodial wallet, something like that. And then, the vast majority of your wealth, for most people, anyone that has any amount of wealth, like well over 90%, you'd probably keep in a deep cold storage multi-sig device, right? And that would be equivalent to, I don't know, a bank account for most people, which is not actually a good solution because there's counterparty risk there. Might be equivalent to gold in a vault or gold buried in the ground for others. But yeah, it's just to reinforce your point. You don't need one solution, right? You can have different solutions for different use cases, and you can rebalance and reallocate as needed. Your earlier question though, like when do people realize this? You've probably heard me say this before because I say it all the time, but I just don't think most people move until they feel sufficient pain, right? There's not a lot of nerds in the world that want to sit here and spend all this time going down the Bitcoin rabbit hole, that are curious enough, that are intelligent enough, patient enough to really try and learn all these lessons, right? Or trying to understand computer science and economics and incentives and, all the different disciplines that Bitcoin touches, or that you touch going down the Bitcoin rabbit hole. I don't think a lot of people have the patience or wherewithal to go into that to get the Bitcoin orange pill epiphany. But what most people do have is a tacit experience of pain, right? Like if their bank account is frozen, or they can't get their capital out of a country, or their currency is hyperinflating, or they're a rich guy and living in Russia, and Putin's going to seize their company or seize their yacht or otherwise redistribute their wealth forcibly. Well, that starts to really give people the light bulb moment. It's like, oh shit, okay, my stuff is getting taken, or my currency is failing, or whatever situation I'm being subjected to under this duress, right? This actual painful experience I'm living through kind of forces people to start evaluating their options. And as we've discussed and laid out, there seems to be only really one viable option for an asset that cannot be forcibly taken from you, assuming you've custodied it properly. So I think, unfortunately, we have to go through more pain. We have to go through more hyperinflations, more forced asset seizures, more statism, before we see Bitcoin really start to shine in the eyes of the majority.
Just to play the devil's advocate here for a while, if I were to make a counter argument to that, that would be places like Lebanon or Argentina or Zimbabwe, where Venezuela, where hyperinflation is a real thing. I mean, Bitcoin adoption exists there, but it's not big. And that might be because these countries started to hyperinflate way before people knew about Bitcoin at all. Can we trust that pain will turn people into hyper-Bitcoinization mode? It's hard to formulate this question, but just curious about your thoughts.
Well, I mean, the other thing is we have to keep in mind where we are in Bitcoin's monetization process, right? Like, Bitcoin will not be purchasing power stable in the short run for a long time, right? It's just too small of a market cap at this point. Maybe when it's in the tens of trillions of dollars in market cap, its short-term purchasing power will be more stable. And that really tends to be what people are looking for, particularly in hyperinflations, right? They want to get out of the purchasing power unstable currency, the currency that's plummeting in purchasing power day over day, week over week. And they want to get into a short-term purchasing power stable currency. That tends to be the US dollar, right? When Zimbabwe hyperinflates, people want to get into dollars. So the pain, I'm not saying it's like you feel the pain once and then all of a sudden you're like orange pilled and you're all in on Bitcoin. But if you could imagine going further into the future, sure, currencies that hyperinflate today, maybe they want to dollarize. And I would expect this pattern to continue to play out, actually. As weaker currencies fail, you would see more of these economies or individuals in those economies looking to move their savings into dollars. Just, again, as a means of gaining short-term purchasing power stability. But what happens when the US dollar, which is also being counterfeited rampantly? I think we've increased the supply of US dollars to the tune of 50% or more in the past 3 years. The number 50 to 60%, I think, are the numbers that I've heard over the past 3 years.
The best number I've seen there is in 2021, $21 million were printed per Bitcoin mined. So $7 trillion, divided by number of Bitcoins printed.
Right. And so that was in 1 year. And that was when the US, M2 was probably in the neighborhood of, I don't know, 15 to 18, 20 trillion, something like that. I'm actually not sure about this.
7 trillion were printed. I mean, it's kind of hard to define because M2 and M1, they're sort of diffuse terms, right? It's not the money in circulation, really. So it's kind of hard to describe it.
What I wanted to get at is that it's call it a 50% increase in the money supply, whatever your gauge you're using, and someone can check my math. But I think roughly over the past 3 years, we've expanded US dollar supply 50%, 50 or more. So all these other countries that are dollarizing, and people would say, "Oh, this bullish dollar's going to last forever." It's like, okay, well, what is the US dollar? US dollar is just the best of the worst, right? It's just another fiat currency that weaker fiat currencies are collapsing into. So what happens, and when you study the nature of fiat currencies, I think you'll quickly determine that they really only head one direction, right? There are massive incentives to counterfeit them into worthlessness over time. So the big question becomes, what happens when major currencies or even the US dollar start to hyperinflate? Where do people run then? You can't dollarize out of a US dollar denominated hyperinflation. So what do you do then? That's where I think the pain, the real pain that's going to wake people up is going to come. And a lot of people will say, Santiago Capital, Brett Johnson, he will just tell you that's never going to happen. The US dollar is going to last forever. We're just such a badass imperialist country. There's no way we'll ever let the dollar fall, and blah, blah, blah. I just don't buy it. I just simply don't buy it. I think human beings follow incentives. The incentives of having a US dollar fiat currency as a central bank is to just keep producing it and using it to extract wealth. That ultimately leads to the debasement of the currency and eventually a hyper debasement or hyperinflation of the currency. And I think there's also major incentives for foreign counterparties to dump dollars over time. And we already see the BRICS countries, right? Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, talking about launching a currency that's orthogonal to the US dollar, right? And commodity based and all of these things. So we've already moved from this kind of unipolar dollar world to much more of a multipolar world with especially the beginning of the Russia-Ukraine conflict. I would expect that to continue. All of that results in diminishing demand for the US dollar, which is going to mean more dollar printing. And I think we see US dollar hyperinflation. Now, again, timing, very scary to talk about here, but I already put out a public prediction, so I'll stick with it. I think by the year 2035, we see the US dollar going into hyperinflation. And so the big question for me is like, what then? What do you dollarize into at that point, right? There's no, you've used up all the options in the fiat currency stack, right? You've been scurrying up the liquidity hierarchy to the most liquid fiat currency to escape your local hyperinflation. Well, what happens when the point of escape becomes the point of failure? Where do people go then? So,
well, take the orange pill now, or be forced to take the orange suppository later. That's
right. Yeah, you could take the orange pill orally now, or it'll be forced as a suppository later, perhaps.
Exactly.
The show is also sponsored by Orange Pill app, the Bitcoin social layer app for iOS and Android, where you can stack friends who stack sats. You can connect with your favorite Bitcoiners on the app, make local connections, and even connect with Bitcoiners around the world. And a big feature on Orange Pill app is events. You can see what's going on in your area and connect with Bitcoiners around you. I've been to multiple Orange Pill app events, and they brought Bitcoiners together from all over. The best part is, it's high signal. There's no spam on Orange Pill app because everyone pays to be there. It's just $3 a month. So download Orange Pill app on Apple or Android and get connected to the Bitcoin social layer. Next up, the Bitcoin Way. Their mission is to onboard, educate, and remove barriers to taking self-custody of your Bitcoin. They cover everything from cold wallets to nodes, no KYC Bitcoin purchases, inheritance planning, payments, and more. Whether you're new to Bitcoin or you're an experienced Bitcoiner looking to expand your freedom footprint, or you know someone who this sounds perfect for, the Bitcoin Way has something for you. They have a skilled team, well-versed in the Bitcoin space, and their goal is to make all the complexities of Bitcoin as straightforward as possible for everyone. And the best part is you can get started with a free 30-minute call with their team. Go to thebitcoinway.com/contact for more info. Our newest sponsor is Geyser. They are the portal to the creator economy on Bitcoin. On Geyser, creators can monetize their work through their communities in a social and engaging way, and supporters can send sats to their favorite projects. Geyser has also recently integrated with Zaps and Podcasting 2.0, so every Zap sent to a Geyser address shows up on the Geyser page. We have a Geyser fund ourselves. It's the best way to support our show directly with Bitcoin. So whether you're a creator or a supporter, check out Geyser at geyser.fund today.
Okay, let's just a weird thought. I love to try to extrapolate the thought vectors as far off into the future as possible. As you know, so we talked a bit about volatility, and in your mind, does Bitcoin ever become stable? Because imagine a hyper Bitcoinized world where everything is priced in Bitcoin and all the fiat currencies have died, and you have, we're us three dorks here, we're like the first generation of Bitcoiners, and people like us are gonna lose a lot of Bitcoin along the way. We're not gonna be able to like store them properly, and so I think people are underestimating the SAT squeeze because of just people losing their keys here and there, boating accidents and so on. So if that is the case, and you get into this global sound money free market with increased productivity everywhere and the purchasing power go up, there's a point where like technology is adopted an S curve, but I don't really ever see the top of this necessarily in Bitcoin, because what would be the top? Like when all the people are on board, well, there's still more money. Well, when all the money is on board, well, there's still more productivity. Like, does it ever end? And combine that with more and more Bitcoins lost. Like, this thing is, is the forever Laura thing, but the the weirdness of the rate of forever Laura-ness, if you will. Well, what are your thoughts on that?
Oh man, that's a great. The infinity divided by 21 million, right? It's like where's the top? Well, we just call it infinity, right? So it's very interesting to me, because what you have, assuming the Bitcoin thesis plays out, is you have a guaranteed fraction, like to whatever degree money is being demanded as to be held as savings, as cash balances, right? It's going to be a reflection of the capital that's available in the marketplace. That capital is a reflection of how productive we actually are. And I actually just listened this morning to Guy Swan read Alan Farrington's piece on the killer app of Bitcoin being it properly pricing capital. And I thought that was really interesting. So Bitcoin's going to improve productivity a number of ways. One, and this would be Hoppe's point in A Theory of Socialism and Capitalism, the degree to which private property is made less violable, which is to say that theft is more expensive, difficult, or risky, is the same degree to which we are incentivizing people to produce rather than steal, right? It's like there's two roads to wealth acquisition. I can make it or I can take it. And if taking is very difficult, if stealing is very difficult, well, then I'm left with only the other option, which is making, right? Creating things of value, trading with other people consensually, etc. We've already talked about how Bitcoin sort of tilts the scales away from taking and towards making, and that because it's expensive to steal, and if you start stealing people's stuff, right? If you start stealing my yachts and houses and whatever, well, then maybe I'll just start selling everything else and putting it into Bitcoin and moving elsewhere where the government doesn't steal my stuff or have stronger property rights. So you get this self-organizing dynamic in the world where people are going to be more likely to engage in consensual trade, long-term trading relationships, making in general, and less so in taking. Now, Alan's point in his paper was interesting too, that we have a really hard time pricing capital appropriately under the current fiat paradigm. And when you start to price capital appropriately, you actually increase productivity, that people are actually able to figure out, through a sound and reliable price signal or profit signal, which uses of capital are satisfying the most human wants, right? You get a very clear signal about where that capital needs to go. Whereas in a fiat paradigm, you have more of this short-termism, just trying to generate the quarterly profit, long-term results be damned. So I think Bitcoin, again, I only listened to this once today and I can't expand upon it super intelligently, but to the extent that Bitcoin allows the proper pricing of capital, I think it also increases human productivity. And so all these expansions that Bitcoin's providing via its incentive system to human productivity are, interestingly enough, also accretive to the purchasing power that Bitcoin represents over time. So it's like, the Ouroboros, the snake eating its own tail. This is like the inverse of that, right? It's like the snake feeding its own mouth or something. Bitcoin's actually creating more human productivity through these incentives, and then thus fattening the snake and the purchasing power that Bitcoin itself is a reflection of as it monetizes. So what is the top of that? I mean, how can any of us possibly know? It's like asking, what is the pinnacle of human development, right? What's the final stage of human evolution? How far are we going to get? Are we going to the stars? Are we going to other dimensions? Where does human ingenuity hit a ceiling? It's like the equivalent question. So I really have no clue, but it is certainly fun to think about. And if you frame it that way, it's like, okay, this is why Bitcoin is legacy. I don't want to say it's wealth, right? Money is not wealth necessarily, but it's legacy purchasing power preservation, because you hold basically a claim on all the successful entrepreneurial enterprises that have occurred and will ever occur in human history for the rest of time. And you can own, 1/21 millionth of that, or 10/21 millionths of that, or 121 millionths of that, whatever fraction you want. And to your earlier point, obviously the denominator is decreasing, right? It's not 21 million. How many coins are there really? 17, 15, whatever. So that's it's a very powerful framing for just how legacy altering Bitcoin can be.
Everything there is and everything there ever will be divided by,
At most
supposedly
21
million. Yeah. Rob, I absolutely love the conversations we have, and I sincerely hope that we get to do more of them, preferably in person, but also online. I mean, we just need to keep this conversation going. I think that's the way forward. So thanks very much for coming on. Luke, do you have any final questions for Rob before we round this out?
I was just going to say that the last, hour or so here, very bullish, enjoying the energy. To be honest, I don't have anything specific. Anything else would be into a rabbit hole, but I've appreciated your time and take on this. Any final thoughts? Anything else on your mind these days?
What? Rob, sincerely, you should have Luke on and on your show and talk about maps of meaning. That's my recommendation for the day.
Yeah, I would love to. I would definitely love to. So please feel free to email me. What we usually do is a conversation outline beforehand, and then I'll just go through that and we can get a time to talk on the books. And yeah, Knut, thank you for having me. Always enjoy our conversations. It's mind bending still to me that it's just this monetary innovation. It's just, I never thought it would be such a philosophical rabbit hole in so many different directions. And I don't know, sometimes I catch myself, the things I'm reading about or thinking about, I'm like, how did Bitcoin lead to all this? I feel very grateful, but also maybe even overwhelmed at times, just how many different directions Bitcoin takes the mind. And so always really like talking to you, because it seems like you're on a similar path and we always have fun things to talk about.
Right back at you. And came for the Lambo, stayed for the Zen, I guess.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yep, I think that's a perfect way to end it on. So thanks again, Rob, for joining us on the Freedom Footprint Show.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah, subscribe, and brush your teeth, and click the little bell for notifications, and follow Rob's channel as well.
Actually, do you want to do an official where do you want to
find it?
I'm whatismoneypodcast.com, or Twitter's my biggest social platform at Breedlove22.
Perfect. Thanks again. This has been the Freedom Footprint Show. So what did you think of that episode with Robert? I really enjoyed digging into maps of meaning with him, and his explanation of Lila has sent that book right to the top of my reading list. What was your favorite moment? Let us know. You can send us a boostergram on Fountain, leave us a comment on YouTube, or get in touch on Nostr or Twitter. If you're watching on YouTube, don't forget to like the episode and subscribe to the channel. Our show sponsors are Amber App, Wasabi Wallet, Orange Pill App, The Bitcoin Way, and Geyser. Check out their details in the description. That's all for now. See you next time, and thanks for listening.